everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of What the Forensics. My name is Nicole, and I am joined here again by the wonderful Journey and Rebecca. This week, Journey will be telling us all about the case of the Atlanta child murders, and then Rebecca will be following us by educating us on the topic of behavioral analysis and how it was involved in this case. We will say, because of just how, in-depth and I assume discussion heavy this will be, we will have this in 2 separate episodes. So please, once you listen to episode part 1 of this, the Atlanta child murders, pop right on over to the behavioral analysis one. If you have the time, you should make the time. I think they're both going to be great. I would like to note that there is a listener's discretion advised, as there are detailed descriptions of death involving children. And this is kind of, unfortunately, keeping in theme with the last few episodes we've had.
Yeah, I was realizing, as I wrote that, I was like, this has been the warning for the last 3 episodes we've released.
Yeah. Might as well just get them all not over with, but discuss them all at once in short succession.
Yeah.
With that, Journey, tell us all about the Atlanta child murders. Why don't you?
Yeah. Okay, I will. I shall. Okay, so this case was shown in the Mindhunter series on Netflix in 2019. And because of that, this case was actually reopened with the hopes of using new technology to test the evidence and hopefully get some DNA evidence as well. I think the mayor of Atlanta was, I think, growing up when all of this was happening. So she holds it very close to her heart, and she really wants to get some answers because the guy they arrested still thinks he's innocent. Spoiler. And so, yeah, she's like, I just want to make sure and solve some of these more murders that weren't solved with this. So, which is super exciting. I hope they do that. And to start, I do want to mention that every victim was Black, and they ranged in age from child to young adult. So I think the youngest is 9 and the oldest is 27, I think.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's a large age range.
It is, yeah. And so we learn a little bit more about why they think that is later on. I don't want to spoil too much of this. And I also do want to apologize if I miss any victims or got any of the information wrong. The information I found was rather inconsistent. So I used the Mindhunter book, and that's written from the FBI's perspective. So I imagine that there's a little bit of a lens placed on that regarding the information. And then there was a couple other websites with their own bias as well. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And I apologize if I get anything wrong. So to just dive right in, the first body that was linked to the Atlanta child murders case was found on July 28th, 1979. And this was 13-year-old Alfred Evans, who went missing 3 days earlier and was killed by strangulation. So he was found in the woods off Niskey Lake Road. He was shirtless and barefoot. Also in these woods was another strong smell of decay that came from somewhere nearby, where they found 14-year-old Edward Hope Smith. And Edward was killed by a gunshot and was either 50 or 150 feet from Alfred, depending on the source. That's quite a range, but either way, he was in the same vicinity as Alfred. Edward had disappeared 4 days before Alfred, so about 7 days before he was found, and the deaths were very gruesome, but the police just wrote them off as drug-related.
Was there a large drug issue in the area? Or they were just like, yeah, we'll label it drugs, do you know?
I feel like, yes, you find 2 Black boys murdered on the side of the road in 1970, you just naturally assume
and the white cops that are working the case.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm following.
That's my assumption. I don't know. They just kind of assumed we find a kid who looks like a vagrant, then it's drug related. And so a little while later, more bodies of Black children started to turn up. On November 8th, the body of 9-year-old Yusuf Bell was found in an abandoned school. He had been missing since late October, and Yusuf was living in a nearby housing project to where his body was found, and his death really hit the community especially hard. I have a quote from his neighbor, which says, "The whole neighborhood cried because they loved that kid." So
wow.
like, everyone was devastated by this 9-year-old's death, which makes sense. And 8 days later, 14-year-old Milton Harvey was found in the East Point section of Atlanta, which is just like a suburb within Atlanta. And he had been reported missing in early September. And they had both been strangled, but Milton's cause of death was marked undetermined, like Alfred Evans, even though the ME said that he had, quote unquote, probably been strangled. I'm not sure why it was marked undetermined, if he, like, if there was some sort of evidence of strangulation. Yeah. But I'm just assuming that, like, if he's basing it off of, like, a broken hyoid or a broken neck, like, kids' bones are more malleable, so it wouldn't have broken. Mm-hmm. But there would have been, like, yeah, I'm sure there was, like, some sort of, like, bruising or something that he was kind of making that deduction with or from.
Yeah, like, I feel like they don't just say they suspect strangulation just on a whim. Like, whether or not the hyoid is broken, like, there's got to be bruising or something for them to have an inkling that that's happening.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm just confused as to why he'd be like, it's undetermined, but then say
fair.
It was this. Yeah, but either way. So even though 4 young black boys' bodies were found in the span of a few months, the Atlanta police did not suspect a link between them. Later on, there's a quote that just is like, so many kids, like, they were just finding dead kids. So they were kind of just like, this is nothing unusual. Like, there's no reason to suspect a serial killer because, like, these kids have been killed by something else. Like, it's just a fact of life. That is
such ridiculously backwards thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know what Atlanta was like in the 1980s, but it sounds not great.
Well, I know Atlanta's in Georgia, and Georgia they were a Bible Belt state, are they not? Which I know were like, there's a whole history of segregation in Georgia and all the Bible Belt states, and I have a hunch that has something to do with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does. I feel like play a part because the KKK was like one of the suspects for this, which I talk about later on. So there's a teaser to make it through this episode. So on March 5th, 1980, 12-year-old Angel Lanier left for school, but she never arrived. Her body was found 5 days later on the side of a road, bound and gagged with an electrical cord.
Holy shit.
The ME didn't find any evidence of sexual assault, but there was another pair of panties stuffed in her mouth, which were not hers.
Oh, how would they know that they're not hers?
Ew.
Sorry, going off that.
I'm assuming...
Because she wasn't wearing them?
Why? But I don't remember. I'm assuming size.
That would make sense. Okay.
But I don't remember why.
Okay.
And because she, like, had hers on.
Yeah.
And so her cause of death was ligature strangulation. And then on March 11th, Willie Mae Mathis was watching the news with her 10-year-old son, Jeffrey, when they found the body of another victim. And she warned her son about talking to strangers. And the next day, he disappeared, walked to the corner store to get bread, and his remains weren't found until a year later.
Holy shit.
Isn't that heartbreaking?
Imagine where were his remains found? I'm sorry. Do you know? Like, were they really close to where he disappeared?
Oh,
because that's wow.
I don't know. I think I mentioned it later, but I don't fully remember.
Okay. Oh my god, that is so sad. That I know it was a different time. Like, I don't think I'd let my child leave.
Yeah, and like,
yeah, you're stuck in the house now.
Literally, a lot of these kids just disappeared, like walking to the grocery store or like on their way home from school, or they're just riding their bike around. Like, it's very, very innocent ways that they just went missing, which it makes it all the more scarier.
Yeah.
And so the body count now is at 6 kids. And at this time, it became clear to the community that they were in danger, and parents gave their children curfews, like Rebecca was saying. And the Atlanta police still did not connect the cases, which caused a lot of frustration within the African-American communities in and around Atlanta.
Rightfully so.
Yes, exactly. On April 15th, the Committee to Stop Children's Murders was formed by Camille Bell, who is Yusuf Bell's mom, and some other parents of the victims. And so the goal of this committee was to push for accountability over the stalled investigations of the kids. And so this committee was eventually successful because the city increased both the size of the investigations task force and reward money for tips. And they also convinced the community to be more aware of who their neighbors were and what is going on in their neighborhood. So kind of starting like an almost neighborhood watch. And they armed themselves with baseball bats and volunteered for the neighborhood patrol and joined the citywide search for clues. Just more eyes on the streets. And then on May 19th, Eric Middlebrook was found murdered a quarter mile from his house, and he is either 14 or 15, depending on the source. And he had gone missing the day before. He had suffered blunt force trauma to his head, as well as slight stab wounds to his chest and arms. And apparently, a few weeks prior to his disappearance, he testified against 3 kids in a robbery case. I don't know if that plays a role in it, because in the Mindhunter book, John Douglas talks about how he doesn't think that all of the cases are connected. And so I wonder if this is one of the cases he doesn't think is connected, but then I'm like, why would you include it if you don't think it's connected? So I don't know. Thought it was interesting. So families of missing or deceased children were understandably very frustrated with the lack of action to solve the murders or disappearance of their children. And then on June 9th, 12-year-old Christopher Richardson disappeared on his way to a local pool, and his body wasn't found until the following January. He was found with a later victim, and his cause of death was undetermined, so most likely strangling.
So there was a second body found with him?
Like some of these victims were found like close together or together.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And yet there was still no connection being made?
Well, like, yeah, and because he just disappeared in June and he wasn't found until January, so like, they didn't know, which is tough because a lot of these kids just went missing in like 1979, 1980, and then they were found in 1981, 1982.
Right. I guess there's still quite a time period in between.
Yeah.
But you would think even with all of these children missing, if they're not all connected, there's different connections between the children. Like maybe it's not one big network, but maybe it's like 4 different little ones that are going on, but like stuff is still happening. And
we don't want our kids to go missing, so like let's maybe stop this.
Well, exactly. And if you think about how many kids on average go missing that aren't connected, it's like there's no way in this one city this many kids are all of a sudden going missing, and there's nothing out of the ordinary. Like that doesn't make sense.
And it was all within like a specific like geographical location too. Like there was like almost borders to where they were going missing from. So I'm like, that's huge.
I'd be curious what the missing, like the numbers of missing children were prior and after this time period.
Yeah, exactly. So on June 22nd, 7 or 8-year-old LaTanya Wilson was abducted from her bedroom early in the morning. A witness saw one man climbing into her window and then talking to a second man in the parking lot, I think while holding her. And her body was found in October, fully skeletonized, and they weren't able to establish a cause of death.
Wow.
So hers stands out a little bit to me because this is the first time where...
house abduction, is it not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so very odd.
Like all of the other ones, from my understanding, were like street abductions, or like they were on their way somewhere. They were walking, traveling somewhere.
Yeah.
And they were taken.
Yeah, something very interesting as well that I didn't really include was that if a witness saw the missing kid before they went missing with someone, it was with 2 people.
Oh, always? Well, almost always?
Yeah, the ones that I read were that way.
Wow.
Which I find very interesting.
Yeah, it is. That's...
Yeah, and I don't know, like, their witness, like, statement, so there's a certain level of, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but yeah, take it with a grain of salt. And so 2 days later, 10-year-old Aaron Weish, I think, his body was found under a bridge in DeKalb County. He had a broken neck, supposedly from a fall, and had died from asphyxia, and he had gone missing only the day before.
Wow. Wow.
On July 6th, 9-year-old Anthony Carter was found behind a warehouse on Wells Street. His cause of death was multiple stab wounds, and because there was no blood where he was found, the investigators knew that his body had been moved. And at this time, the public commissioner Brown started the Missing and Murdered Task Force, which had 50 members, but the murders still continued. And on July 31st, 10-year-old Earl Terrell was reported missing close to where Milton Harvey's body was found. And his body was found with Christopher Richardson in the following January. So Earl and Christopher were found together, but they had gone missing almost 2 months apart.
That's a little suspect if they're not
right
putting things together at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. And the murder of 13-year-old Clifford Jones really helped to push the authorities into action because he was from Cleveland. And the murder of a tourist made national news. And he was found strangled with a ligature in an alley off of Hollywood Road on August 21st. And apparently there were ransom calls made concerning Earl Terrell that indicated he had been moved across state lines to Alabama, which gave the FBI jurisdiction to get involved, even though it was later learned that the ransom calls were a hoax and the FBI had to back out of the investigation again. But it kind of like drew their attention to what was going on in Atlanta because a lot of the families were trying to get their attention and get their help. And then on September 14th or 16th, 11-year-old Darren Glass was reported missing. His body has actually never been found, which is devastating. And Mayor Maynard Jackson asked the White House for help and to have the FBI specifically conduct the investigation. And the FBI still didn't really have any jurisdiction, but started looking into the missing kids. Started looking into if the missing kids had crossed state lines or if the cases were in fact linked. And because the victims were all Black, the FBI could determine if this was a violation of federal civil rights. And so if it didn't turn out that the kids were taken across state lines, they could intervene because of the violation of civil rights, which I find interesting.
Yeah.
And then on November 1st, 9-year-old Aaron Jackson went missing, and his body was found the next day, and he was found strangled on a riverbank. On November 30th, 16-year-old Patrick Rogers went missing, and apparently he knew several of the previous victims, and his body was found on December 7th in the Chattahoochee River. And so it's at this time that Roy Hazelwood and John Douglas enter the picture, who I'm sure Rebecca probably talks a lot more about. And apparently the Atlanta police didn't want to cooperate with the FBI because they didn't want them like stealing their show.
What show? They weren't doing anything.
Literally, I'm like, you still don't think the cases are linked. Like, more manpower is a good thing.
Yeah.
So Roy and John's goal in going to Atlanta was to determine if the cases were linked and if there was a conspiracy behind them. And so the three things that they learned from going over the case files were, number one, the Klan wasn't involved because the victims were all Black. The Ku Klux Klan was a suspect, which we have an episode coming out about them later this year as well. And the reason they thought that they weren't involved was because if they were to do something of this caliber, they would make it very well known that it was them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the KKK was not afraid to show what they were doing to Black people at the time.
Yeah. So because there wasn't any, like, no one was coming forward and taking accountability for this, they were like, KKK didn't do it. They have too big of egos to let someone else take the fall for this. And they were also pretty certain that the offender was Black because they were in a predominantly Black area. So a white person taking kids off the street would have been noticed. So they were like, nope, you kind of belong in this area. And many of the deaths and disappearance were linked, but not all of them were. And so they didn't think that the girls were killed by the same person, especially LaTanya, because her abduction from her bedroom was way too specific. It was very different from any of the other murders. And they also didn't think they were dealing with only one killer. Kind of like, because they weren't all killed by the same person. There was going to be more than one killer, which just makes sense. And so their profile was that the offender would be a single black male between the ages of 25 and 29, a police buff, drive a police type vehicle, have a police type dog like a German Shepherd or Doberman, and would insinuate himself into the investigation. He would be sexually attracted to young boys, but was sexually inadequate because there was no evidence of sexual abuse or assault, which is interesting because there wasn't stabbings in every single one either. And at some point, the kids would reject him and he would feel compelled to kill them because of this rejection or perceived rejection.
Was this the profile developed by Douglas?
Yes. That's what he wrote in his book, almost verbatim.
Okay, because I have to be completely honest, I did not read his book, which is part of the reason I don't go as in depth about it later. But I know his official profile wasn't like officially released, like the one that he gave to courts, and so I was having trouble finding it, so I'm really glad that you put that in there.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, he because like profile, like it was so new in the profiling like era, they weren't really brought in as profilers, kind of like it was just an extra thing and no one really held any weight in it. But yeah, so that was their profile. That's the man they're looking for. All of the police officers are like, no way, that's not going to happen. But they're like, just you wait. And so the first known victim of 1981 was 14-year-old Luby Geeter, who had disappeared on January 3rd and was found on February 5th. He had been strangled and his genitals, lower pelvic area, and both feet were missing.
Oh?
Super not okay, but also very different from all the other ones. So I don't think he was killed by the same person who was strangling these kids. Even though he was also strangled. And then 15-year-old Terry Pugh is found along Sigmund Road in Rockdale County. And he had gone missing in January and lived in the same apartment building as Edward Smith, who was killed in 1979. And I don't know if they lived there at the same time or if he had moved in there after Edward was killed. I'm not sure how that works.
Right.
And then 12-year-old Patrick Balthazar was found off Beaufort Highway in DeKalb County in February. Both he and Terry were strangled. I believe they were found together or just around the same time. But on Patrick's body, they found hair and fibers that matched hair and fibers found on 5 other victims. And so these forensic findings were announced in the news, so John Douglas expected that the killer would begin dumping the bodies in the river to get rid of the evidence linking the kills. And so investigators had found the body of Patrick Rogers on the Cobb County side of the Chattahoochee River back in December, but he was a school dropout who was known to the law, so they didn't think that he fit the victim profile, so that's why they're not considering him using the river as a dumping ground. Just to kind of go back to that. That was such a weird way for me to put that in there. But it took me until I finished reading it to understand what I was trying to say. And then between February and early May, more bodies were being found. And among them were 13-year-old Curtis Walker in the South River and 13-year-old Timmy Hill and 21-year-old Eddie Duncan in the Chattahoochee. Timmy and Eddie were found one day apart. And all 3 of these bodies had been stripped of their clothing, so no extra hair or fibers were found on them. And then finally, Williams enters the story on May 22nd. At 2:30 in the morning, Bob Campbell, who is a police academy recruit brought in to help with the search, he was finishing his surveillance shift underneath the Jackson Parkway Bridge on the Chattahoochee when he saw a car stop halfway across the bridge and then heard a splash. So a stakeout car then followed and pulled this car over, and driving the 1970 Chevy station wagon was 23-year-old Wayne Bertram Williams. They questioned him and searched his car, but they ended up letting him go because they couldn't really prove that he did anything.
Did they not search the river if they heard a splash?
Well, I don't know, because they couldn't really prove that he dumped a body, I guess. Like, I don't know how fast it's moving either.
That's fair. Because I feel like the first instinct, especially if you're like with a partner, one person goes to detain them or go to detain the guy first and then maybe peer over, take a look at the water to see, oh, is there a body floating?
Yeah, what's in there?
What's in there?
I agree.
Or at least send a search team out after.
Yeah, right? Like, let's maybe like drag the river. But I guess that's a lot of manpower for someone who might have just thrown like like an apple,
a bag of garbage, I guess. Like, I feel like it's the 70s. It wouldn't have been, he wouldn't have been the only guy like just dumping his trash in the river to get rid of it.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, like, I feel like if I had heard the splash that a body made, I would classify it as a very large splash, not just a splash. Because to me, that's just like a little, you throw an apple into the river, like just a little. But I don't know. So 2 days later, the body of 27-year-old Nathaniel, his last name's either Carter or Cater. It varied on the source. And he was found downstream and not far from where 21-year-old Jimmy Ray Payne was found a month earlier. And so even though they had found Nathaniel Carter, like not far from where they had heard Williams throw something over the bridge, they didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. So they put him under bumper lock surveillance, which just basically means that they followed him so closely that their bumpers touched, which I don't know why I find that funny, but I think that's funny. So Williams became aware of his police tail, so he took them on a wild goose chase around the city, and he was observed burning photographs in his backyard and washing out his car. And he also fit their profile like pretty perfectly. So he was a police buff who owned a German Shepherd, had been arrested for impersonating a police officer, had a police-type vehicle, and used police scanners to get to crime scenes to take pictures. So on that sense, but he didn't insinuate himself into the like investigation in any way, and he's younger than their profile expects. But he is single.
Right.
And so the FBI asked him to come to the office, where they apparently interviewed him poorly, and Douglas knew that they would never get a confession out of him because of it. And Williams took a polygraph test, and it came back inconclusive, which is not a shocker. And they found a book on how to beat a lie detector test in his house once they got a warrant to search it.
That is just so non-suspicious.
Yeah, right? Like, he's just a regular guy.
Yeah, it's just light reading material.
Exactly. And so this all happened around May 25th-ish. And so they obtained the warrant to search his house, which he lived in with his parents, on June 3rd. They found hair and fibers linking him to 12 of the murders in his car, despite the fact that he washed it out, in his room and in his house.
Oh.
And yeah.
That feels like a lot of evidence. And was it actual hair evidence? Like it was a human hair? Or was this I've seen like Forensic Files episodes where the hair analysis is actually like a fiber from the carpet that they've called a hair. But everyone has that carpet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think majority was like they took fibers from like his bed, his carpet, like the carpet in his car. And some of the victims were found with dog hair on it that matched his German Shepherd.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's what they mean by hair or not. And I'm sure there would have been some hair, but not from the root. Like, so you can't exactly get DNA. But
yeah, totally fair.
I don't actually know. John Douglas didn't go into any detail on the evidence, really. So I was like, okay, cool. And they were able to link some of the victims to Williams before they died. So they actually found fibers from clothes that they had worn previously in his house. Oh. Which is crazy. Oh, also, I really want to know which 12 of the murders he was linked to. No one tells you.
What?
I cannot.
Maybe, like, is the case still open? Is that why they can't?
I don't know. Because, like, the names of all the victims have been released, more or less. And so I don't understand why they haven't been like, he was linked to these 12 kids.
Oh, yeah.
So on June 21st, Williams was arrested for the murder of Nathaniel Carter, and his trial began in 1982, after 6 days of jury selection. And majority of the jury was women. So there was 9 women and 3 men, and the jury was also predominantly black. I don't know how it was divided.
It's really interesting that the jury was mostly women. I think that bodes well for the children. I think they're going to be more empathetic for them, but I am so used to seeing like a majority men jury. I just think that's really interesting for 1982.
Well, and I'm glad that there was also like, it was predominantly black as well, so that
it was accurately represented for the jurisdiction that it was in. I agree. I think that's great because
I think that's
in cases we talk about that are like from the 90s and or from the 1900s, like that is not common.
Yeah, it's a proper like jury of your peers. Although he was linked to 12 murders, he was only being tried for 2, which are Nathaniel Carter and Jimmy Ray Payne. I don't know why he wasn't tried for the other 10 murders he was linked to, which seems like such an oversight on the like court's part, but whatever.
Maybe they like went into it with the mentality of, if we catch this guy, we have enough evidence for these 2 cases, so we have the strongest cases against him, and if he's convicted, he'll be put away for long enough that like we don't need to include the other.
Just kind of maybe like they can use them time and money.
Yeah, or use them as additional cases in the future to try.
I guess. Yeah, because I guess if you like try him for all 12 and they find him not guilty, you can't bring him back to retry him for all 12.
Yeah.
But they did, where do I have it? The Georgia criminal procedure allowed the prosecution to bring in other linked cases. So they were allowed to use the fact that he was linked to 10 other deaths kind of against him, which is very interesting because that doesn't happen all the time. And while he was on trial, Williams was mild-mannered, controlled, well-spoken, and friendly. He also quote, looked more like the Pillsbury Doughboy than a serial killer of children, end quote.
Oh my gosh.
Which works well for him.
I'm sure the Pillsbury Doughboy would absolutely love to be compared to a serial killer. Like, that does great for their cookie brand.
Yeah, exactly. And so he would also give statements to the press saying that he was innocent and his arrest was based solely on race and he was being unjustly tried or whatever. And so the defense had brought in a forensic psychologist named Michael Brad Bayless to testify that Williams didn't fit the profile and was incapable of the murders. And so Bayless had 3 interviews with Williams and ended up not testifying. He just kind of left and didn't come back. And he told the Atlanta Journal and the Atlanta Constitution newspapers that Williams, quote, wanted me to do one of 2 things, and that was to change my report and not say certain things or not testify, end quote. So by him not testifying kind of makes it look like he was guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was about 700 pieces of hair and fiber evidence in this trial. And the forensic investigators who were called to testify were able to match fibers from all 12 victims to Williams' violet and green bedspread, connected most to his carpet in his room, half to the carpet in the living room, half to his vehicle, and all but one was connected to his dog. Which is...
But, okay, if they're connected to his dog, do they know it's specifically that German Shepherd or that it's just a German Shepherd breed and that they're making the assumption then that it's his dog?
I don't know.
I'm going to go with the latter on that one.
Yeah. I feel like they're kind of like, well, because they like linked all 12 of these victims to his like specific bedspread, you can kind of make the assumption that the German Shepherd would be his German Shepherd, and like the probability of someone having that exact same bedspread, that same carpet in their house, their car, and that dog is pretty slim.
Okay.
But Yeah, I don't know. And unfortunately, their presentation was so full of complex information that it didn't captivate the jury. They just kind of sat there and just in one ear out the other.
Yeah.
And so the defense had brought in a very handsome man who simplified a bunch of stuff to rebuke their testimony, which stuck more with the jury, which is unfortunate for prosecution, but great for defense.
Yeah.
And so at some point, Williams decided to take the stand, which is a huge mistake. If you're ever on trial, don't take the stand. It doesn't help you.
Even if you're innocent, the prosecution has such a way of like tangling your words and pulling words from you that you don't even say. It's insane.
It very, very rarely helps. Yeah. Like, you can tell your story, but then cross-examination is probably just going to destroy it, and they're just going to confuse you and make you sound guilty, even if you're totally innocent. Just like, don't testify.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone in that room is smarter than you are, so just don't go on the stand.
Yeah.
And according to Douglas, when the defense was questioning him, his attorney, Al Binder, kept making the same point. Quote, "Look at him. Does he look like a serial killer? Look at him. Get up, Wayne. Look how soft his hands are. Do you think he would have the strength to kill someone, to strangle someone with these hands?" End quote.
That's quite a defense.
That makes me laugh so hard because, like, it is winter. I have very dry, rough hands. Does that make me a killer? I don't have soft hands.
Right?
It's the skin of a killer, Bella.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like that's also something that you can't say to a jury as a lawyer.
Yeah, it's just you're just basing it off of like visual looks. You can't. I don't know. You can't do that.
So either way, as a result of that, Williams was believed to be the innocent victim of a racially biased system that needed a suspect for these gruesome murders, so they chose him.
I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this because I always thought, despite having read Mindhunter and seeing the TV show, and I know it's fictionalized and sensationalized, the show, but I didn't realize that there was evidence that like strongly could point towards Williams. Like I always thought it was just, there was no evidence to point towards him. He upheld his innocence and it was a unjust system, which I still think it is, but
oh yeah.
I don't know. I think there's fair evidence to consider him a suspect and not. I don't think he's 100% innocent because there were a lot of kids that disappeared and were killed in a lot of different manners. And
well,
I don't know.
Because there's 29 kids that are included under the umbrella of the Atlanta child murderer.
Okay, yeah.
And 12 of them were linked to Williams. So I feel like he killed the 12, but he was not responsible for the remaining ones.
Or had part in the 12 at least.
Yeah.
Because if there's two people that were seen in a lot of eyewitness testimonies, maybe if he is innocent, he's not the one physically killing these kids, but maybe in on the plot.
Well, and like, because the witness who saw LaTanya Wilson, like, if she's not included in the Atlanta child murders anymore because of the difference in it, then those two witnesses or like that witness is like those two people. So if I had known which kids were included in the 12, then I could look more into the witness statements and be like, this kid was seen with two people. Therefore, the chance of two murderers is a little bit higher, but I have no idea. And so for cross-examination, Douglas worked with the district attorney, the ADA, Jack Mallard, on how to get him to crack. So I'm just going to read this verbatim because it is so beautifully written. Quote, "At the right time, he, Mallard, goes in close, puts his hand on William's arm, and in a low, methodical South Georgia drawl says, 'What was it like, Wayne? What was it like when you wrapped your fingers around the victim's throat? Did you panic? Did you panic?' And in a weak voice of his own, William says, 'No.' Then he catches himself. He flies into a rage. For the first time, the jury had seen the other side of Wayne Williams." End quote.
Ooh.
That's so fascinating, but it also feels a little manipulative. Like,
oh yeah, a little coerced, just a little bit.
I'm like, oh, how much can we consider that like coercion? Because, I don't know. It's
because he very well could have been saying like no to himself, to the fact that like no, he didn't do it, so no, like stop talking, no, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Like he could have been saying no to, no, I didn't panic when I did it. Or it could be saying no, like, no, how could you be asking me these things? Like,
exactly. Oof. Yeah. So it would be something to see that interaction because I feel like we're missing a lot of body language with it.
Yeah.
And
a lot of pre and
the
post
rage
context
that he flew into after, like, what was that?
Was it just him raising his voice? Was it him like standing up on the stand and like freaking out? Like, what did that entail? Yeah, I'd be curious to see.
Yeah, so I feel like there's more information to it. But nonetheless, on February 27th, 1982, the jury found him guilty for both murders after 11 hours of deliberation, and Williams was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences.
Wow.
And at the end of the chapter on the Atlanta child murders in the Mindhunter book, Douglas says something very interesting that I'm going to read to you guys, and then we're going to talk about it. So, quote, despite what his supporters maintain, I believe the forensic and behavioral evidence points conclusively to Wayne Williams as the killer of 11 young men in Atlanta. Despite what his detractors and accusers maintain, I believe there is no strong evidence linking him to all or even most of the deaths and disappearances of children in that city between 1979 and 1981. Despite what some people would like to believe, young Black and white children continue to die mysteriously in Atlanta and other cities. We have an idea who did some of the others. It isn't a single offender, and the truth isn't pleasant. So far, though, there's been neither the evidence nor the public will to seek indictment. End quote. So
that is, I mean, I'm glad he admits that he doesn't believe. He's like, yes, I helped in convicting him, but we need to keep looking. He wasn't the only one. Also, I had part of that quote to say in like my last slide, so good to know I'm gonna skip that.
That's funny. Yeah, like we have an idea who did some of the others is like,
are they acting on it? What are they doing?
Like, let's pursue
Are they sitting on that? Yeah. And the fact that he states the killer of 11 young men, but then also saying,
but up until then he had said 12.
Yeah, that's what I'm confused about. I'm like, okay, who was the 12th that was like discarded or excluded from that number?
Exactly.
Yeah, I wonder if new evidence came out that like he can't say because, like you said, technically like they've reopened this, there's DNA and stuff to be looked at. Like, I'm curious if new evidence has come out that has made him second guess like one of his beliefs.
This book was written in 1995.
Oh.
So the case was closed at that point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. I had read a different book called Haunting Adeline, and in it, the male main character is hunting down this underground organization of human traffickers and sex traffickers. And so there's a whole bunch of like huge, this is so conspiracy theory. There's like huge, like government officials within this like organization who are like kidnapping and selling children.
This is completely fictionalized too, right? Just to put it out there. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't fully believe that this organization doesn't exist.
Okay.
Because it's just a little too true.
Okay. Anyways, continue though.
But the book is fiction. And so then when he's like, we have an idea who did some of the others so far, it isn't a single offender and the truth isn't pleasant, makes me think that there's some sort of organization.
Inside, yeah.
That's
people
kidnapping
know more
these
than
children.
they're letting on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find it interesting too that there's no strong evidence linking him to all or even most of the deaths of children in the city between the Atlanta child murder period. So are those 11 young men in Atlanta, do they fall outside of the however many were attributed to the Atlanta child murders? And is he completely separate, or is there some overlap?
I think there's overlap. I think it's like the 11 of the 29 are linked to him. But the remaining 18 aren't linked to him at all.
Okay.
That's my assumption. So then when he says there's no strong evidence linking him to all or even most of the deaths and disappearances of the children in that city, that's the 18 that he's not actually linked to.
Right. Just like the wording of it makes it seem that he has a very little part to play in the Atlanta child murders.
Well, he's linked to less than half of the kids who died. So there's something else going on.
Wild.
When he was arrested, they say the murders stop, but kids continue to go missing and get found dead. Like, yeah.
Any information about children being found after that continue to go missing? Because like with the Atlanta child murders, a lot of them were found within days, months, and some years, but a lot found the next day.
Yeah. So then I'm wondering if that's why they were able to give it a time frame, because if in 1992 or 1982 kids would go missing and they wouldn't be found the next day.
They're not. Yeah. They fall outside of that.
Yeah, but the only kid who hasn't been found is Darren Glass in the Atlanta child murders time span. And everyone else has been found dead.
Ooh. Interesting.
And of the 29 that are considered part of the but just it's so, for such a huge case, not a lot is known on it, and there are still so many questions.
Yeah. And with the research that you did you find much about the reopening of the case, and if anything's been brought to light? New evidence, new testing, any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, apparently they submitted a bunch of stuff for DNA testing, and then a year later, the parents were like, can we get the results to that? And that's all that's been known. So I don't know if the results have been shared with the parents or they haven't been shared with the public. And it's been, I think, 2 years.
Wow.
Because it opened in 2019. And then I think in 2020 or 2022, that's when they submitted a bunch of stuff for DNA testing. And then in 2023, parents were like, hey, can we see that?
Wow. I think it's so interesting because I understand that, and this is obviously all a bit of a tangent now, but I understand the parents want answers. They want to be kept in the loop in this investigation. But unfortunately, most open investigations, they're not going to keep the family in the loop because of there's so much information that they need to keep private so it doesn't get out to the public. You know what I mean? So they're not going to tell the parents because, obviously they're grieving. So they don't want them to release anything that could be detrimental to the case. And I feel so bad about it. I don't remember what I was watching lately, but I was watching some true crime, and the parents thought that the police weren't doing anything. It had been 10 years and they didn't hear anything. And then out of the blue, the police was like, so we just arrested someone in your daughter's murder. And they didn't know because it was someone very close to the family. They didn't want to risk the family saying anything.
Okay.
Yeah,
so it's really interesting. I feel really bad that the family's not kept in the loop, but at the same time, I understand why.
Yeah, the police still have to do their jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that's pretty much all I have for the Atlanta child murders. It's very interesting to discuss because it is very conspiracy theory coded, and a lot of people do still believe that the KKK was actually what happened, and Williams is still nope, I didn't do it, and so he's up for parole, I think, in 2027, so hopefully that gets denied. And it's just wild. But this case was
Sorry to interrupt. You can keep talking.
Go ahead.
I was just theorizing.
No, go ahead.
Going back to the different people, I think KKK probably was involved. When are they not involved in shitty things like this? But then again, like you had mentioned, Rebecca, they made it pretty clear that they were involved in these things. So at what point are they actually involved? And then with the amount of different patterns and MOs and whatever seen, it makes you wonder, well, how many people are actually at play in this? Because unless one person's doing all of this, which seems very, very highly unlikely, just given like our understanding and knowledge of human behavior and killing people, you kind of wonder, well, how many then could be involved?
Exactly.
Because at least two, at least. Could that go upwards of like 5 to 10? Who knows? Is it like one killer? Yeah. Well, because maybe it's a different killer for the remaining 18.
Exactly. And so it's like, are some of these drug related? Was that one kid killed by someone retaliating for him testifying against those other 3 kids? Like, you just don't know.
They just monopolized on the fact that they're an overseeing serial killer had been created. So now maybe people are taking up the chance to target young Black youth or Black individuals in general. Because you said upwards of 29, 22 was like the oldest. Something in the 20s.
Or 28, 27 I think was the oldest.
But like, do they just kill a Black individual and then hope that it's going to be classified as an Atlanta child murder at this point because of that term's out there? And like, I don't know. There's just a lot of questions, like you said.
Yeah. Because like, if you did want to kill someone, like, what better time than if there's an active serial killer?
An active serial killer. You just choose a somewhat related victim in the sense of it being the 70s and 80s, and just your color of skin is going to classify you as a group, categorize you.
I was going to say the 70s was a great time for one-off murders because that was like prime time for serial killers.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I just don't know. Wayne thinks he's innocent. I don't believe that he is. I did going into this, and then I read more, and I was like, nope, you killed those 12. I don't know about the rest, but you definitely did those 12.
Yeah, you were at least guilty to some.
Yeah, wow. You're not innocent by any stretch.
That was a lot of information. Even despite knowing what I knew about those murders, I'm still shocked every time I hear it. Like, I feel like I learned something new, or some new evidence comes to light that makes me ponder a bit more. As kind of a segue now into Rebecca's part of this episode, this case was definitely a major turning point for the behavioral analysis unit at the FBI. So we will catch you in the next episode that is also posted today if you want to learn all about behavioral analysis. I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful, intriguing, thought-provoking topic that Rebecca will tell us more about. So we'll see you on the next episode.
Just a reminder to everyone that we are not professionals in the forensic science field. We are just interested in forensics and want to share what we are learning with our listeners. We're trying to give you the most accurate information, but we are human and can make mistakes. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next week.